My favorite survival horror game of all time is The Evil Within. The first one, not the second one. That one's mid at best. I honestly don't know why. Like, if you ask me what the best survival horror game of all time is, I definitely wouldn't say The Evil Within. But if you try to tell me that The Evil Within is bad, then those would be fighting words. I don't know, man. It's just a super fun game with a weird story and cool monsters. You know what else is a super fun game with a weird story and cool monsters?
My mom!
Total Chaos released pretty recently, in November 2025, except it actually didn't, because Total Chaos originally came out in 2018 as a mod for Doom 2. Now, we need to ask ourselves an important question here. At what point does something no longer count as a mod for a game? Like, it's just a whole other game. The original Total Chaos doesn't even share enemies with Doom or anything. Like, they basically just use the engine to make their own thing. Cool. Well, I'm not going to talk too much about the original. It's free. Check it out if you want. Total Chaos, the standalone, is not free, but I do think it's one of the best survival horror games I've played in a while. See, my journey with Total Chaos was that about halfway through my first playthrough, I was convinced the game might dethrone The Evil Within, like it was so good. Then by the end of my first playthrough, I was more of a, it's good but, type of opinion. Then on my second run, I decided to do the good ending, and I flipped again. This game is amazing. So let's discuss, because while Total Chaos definitely isn't perfect, I think among survival horror games released in recent years, this is up there with the best. So what makes a good survival horror game? Actually, what makes a survival horror game at all? It's kinda hard to tell. One thing I'd say that separates survival horror from just horror is that you're almost always allowed to fight the scary monsters the game throws at you. This is unlike horror, where the whole point of the game is usually to make you feel helpless. But what separates survival horror from action horror, which is often called survival horror, is that you're not supposed to be able to kill every enemy that comes at you, at least not without using way too many resources in the process. I think this is something a lot of supposed survival horror games get wrong. Like, I would call Resident Evil 4 action horror, and honestly, same with my beloved Evil Within, which is basically Resident Evil 4 with a new coat of paint. But where does Total Chaos fall on this spectrum? Well, if we judge it just by what I mentioned above, it's even more on the action horror spectrum than either of those two games. You can very easily kill every normal enemy this game throws at you, no problem. Total Chaos is stupidly generous with the resources it gives you, so much so that towards the end of the game it literally tells you, you won't get to keep all this shit you've been hoarding the entire game beyond this point, so use it.
The suit will weigh you down like a coffin. Carrying anything else will only drag you further into suffering. Whatever you've been hoarding up till now, whatever tools you've clung to, now is the time to use them.
Now weirdly, Total Chaos also has some survival game elements in it, so like maybe it is literally survival horror. You have to manage hunger and bleeding, and you get to craft weapons and consumables with resources you find, but just like how generous this game is with weapons, you never really have to worry about food, so it really just ends up being a kind of annoying feature. It does balance out its generosity though in a pretty clever way, which I'll discuss later. But it does indeed have the survival part covered, so does it have horror? Certainly it does. It even has many sections where you can't fight the giant monster chasing you, along with plenty of pretty trippy madness sections. Some of these are actually pretty fucking scary, which I'll also discuss later, but let's start with the basics of this game. So Total Chaos is a first-person survival horror game, which correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I think only really became popular with Resident Evil 7. Plenty of horror games have been first-person, but usually survival horror wasn't before that game came out. I honestly can't say that I have a preference, but I think there's usually a very clear pattern in why games choose first-person over third. Usually it's because they want the game to be more on the scary side. Like if we put survival horror on a spectrum from Alan Wake to Silent Hill, even though both of those games are in first person, I think usually first person games will lean more towards the Silent Hill side, like they're trying to be scary and mind-bending. Not to say that Alan Wake isn't scary. Actually, I am saying that. It's a good game though. Anyway, what first person does is it makes what's happening to you in the game much more personal, which in turn makes it scarier. Like if you compare RE7 to the RE2 remake, in RE7, you are being chased around the house by Jack, while in RE2, Leon is being chased by Mr. X. Both situations are super tense, but one is like, holy shit, I'm gonna die, and one is like, holy shit, my guy's gonna die. With this game, I don't think you need to dig too deep into why it's first person, because it was a Doom 2 mod, but also many of the scarier parts of this game just wouldn't work if it was in third person. All of this is to say that Total Chaos is fucking scary, alright? The combat is mainly melee combat, which somehow is pretty solid in this game. Never would I have thought that a survival horror game would have decent melee combat, but here we are. The combat is one of the more fun parts of the game actually, and the weapons themselves are immaculate. Like, of course I want to kill monsters with a pair of scissors taped to a lead pipe, or a rock with nails taped to it inside of a sack, or as Total Chaos calls it, the nailed rock sack. Like, they're all just so crazy, like taping scissors to a brick, a butcher's knife to a wrench, a spear made of rags and scrap metal that you can light on fire. And if at any point you want to upgrade these weapons, all you have to do is strap some barbed wire to it. The shit that your character makes in this game is so deranged, which is fitting with the story, but it made me love finding a workbench because I never knew what the fuck I was gonna walk away with. That being said, not all of these weapons are made equal, so you find a lot of crates in this game which you can break using weapons. The pickaxe and axe are supposed to be especially good at this, breaking the crates in half as many hits as the other weapons. Which is to say, they break the crate in one attack while others take two. Whoa, how useful is that? Especially considering that one heavy attack from any weapon that can do them will also break them. But anyway, there are really 4 classes of weapons: knives, small weapons, big weapons, and spears, and there's even like subclasses among those. I'm pretty sure attack speed is dictated by how heavy the weapon is most of the time, except for when it comes to spears, because those are super fast and heavy both. But even among the 4 classes, many weapons have their own unique animations. Like the actual 2 knives have different animations than the makeshift shivs, and not all big weapons share the same attacks. It's a really good system actually. It makes every weapon feel distinct, making you want to see as many as you can. For me, my favorite was the knife spear, which is of course just a knife tied to a long stick. By the way, and this is meant in full disrespect to the developer, why do we only get to make one nailed rucksack throughout the entire game? Like, that would have been my favorite weapon if I got to use it more than once. But weapons have durability in this game, which just like the hunger is often a super annoying mechanic to be included in video games. The difference here is that this game gives you so many weapons and so many weird recipes to make them, that them breaking isn't annoying, it's an opportunity. I try to make that sound like ChatGPT wrote it, you know, something like, your wife leaving you isn't an ending, it's the start of something better. But I don't know how well I did. I think nobody can match that thing when it comes to blazing. Besides just swinging your weapon, you can heavy attack and parry, which I only ever did against one specific enemy type who also have melee weapons. So it was really easy to read their attacks, but otherwise I just dodged. What you're supposed to do is use throwables, like bricks or bottles, to stun enemies by hitting them in the head. But I also barely ever did that. You know, maybe I'm just not that good at playing video games. Anyway, I think far and away the biggest reason why durability isn't annoying, besides the abundance of other weapons, is because guns don't have it. There's only 5 guns in this game: a pistol, a revolver, a shotgun, a harpoon gun, and an SMG. And technically a double barrel shotgun, but you only get it once, so it doesn't count. But besides the SMG, you get all of these weapons multiple times. With the shotgun and pistol, that's 2 times, mainly so that if you miss them earlier, you don't miss them entirely. But you get like 10 harpoon guns. Not because you need 10 of them, but because the harpoon gun is also used for navigation sometimes, and this game doesn't have the guts to make you backtrack to find yours if you lost it. Mainly though, that's because backtracking isn't really possible in this game. I can't really complain though, because I've played Resident Evil 0, which is the CEO of backtracking, and it was not the most enjoyable thing in the world. Anyway, very much in contrast to the abundance of melee weapons, ammo is super scarce in this game, which is why it's rewarding to reach that second to last mission and get told, use up all the ammo you've been storing. Which in my case was like 10 pistol bullets, 20 revolver, 30 shotgun, and like 100 SMG, which really isn't that much. It makes you generally be very deliberate about what enemies you use bullets on, because anytime you need them for a boss, the game just gives you an infinite supply. Some enemies, like these X-looking things and these armored ones, are just not worth fighting in melee. You're probably not going to lose a 1v1, but you will take damage, and while healing supplies aren't really scarce either, there's also a ton of opportunities to use your shit up in this game. So with all the abundance in this game, what's to stop you from walking around with like 40 fucky homemade melee weapons and dog walking the entire game? Well, unlike many survival horror games, you don't need to manage inventory space visually, although it does still have that system. Rather, you have a weight limit. 50 kgs is all you can carry without being slowed down, and then like 80 is enough to stop you from moving entirely. You do get to upgrade this by about 10 kg by taking drugs, or like 30 by finding a certain piece of armor, but this is by far one of the most devious things this game does. So when you hit that 50 kg limit, you will notice that you are undoubtedly walking slower, but not significantly slower. It's actually really easy to tell yourself having extra supplies is worth walking slow, because after all, you might need the 20 food supplies you have in your bag or the 5 different weapons. Except you don't, buddy. You never need that much of anything in this game, and that slowdown effect is such a trap. My first playthrough, I spent the entire time over encumbered, and at many times in the game, I was like, this game fucking sucks. How could they expect me to be nearly frame perfect to avoid drowning? Or like, so being seen by that enemy is literally just death because I can't possibly outrun it. Well, yes you can, and you can also clear the underwater sections without even getting close to drowning, as long as you're not carrying too much shit. It also just makes the melee combat so much harder because you can barely dodge any of these attacks and you can't outrun half the enemies. But once you are a hoarder, it's really hard to get rid of everything that you've been holding on to, so you just keep dragging it with you and keep suffering for your inability to let go. Hey, whoa, that doesn't have any story relevance, does it? Anyway, I'm not entirely sure if this was intentional, but this weight limit system is so insanely genius because it punishes you for playing the game wrong, but your brain refuses to recognize that because in exchange you get to carry all the shit that you don't need. Now this is a quick side note, but I don't know who thought Total Chaos was a good name for this game, It does not at all describe the combat, story, or setting of this video game. Total Chaos sounds like a kind of a lighthearted shooter game, like Doom maybe, or Blood, which is not at all what this game is. Anyway, the enemies in this game aren't really a strong point, but they're also not a weak point if that makes sense. They're just alright. I think the reason I say that is because none of them are really that intimidating. They're all pretty much disfigured humans, which also definitely doesn't have story relevance. But the only big scary enemies are either unkillable or are bosses. Big scary monsters are definitely here, but you never get to actually fight them. Usually you just have to run away. We'll discuss them later when we talk about the horror sections, but the basic enemies are brutes, which do kind of show a resemblance to a Doom enemy. They kind of look like imps. They're whatever. They hit hard, but they're also easy to kill. Only really threatening when they catch you lacking or there's a group of them. These spiders are one of the cooler enemies because almost always you'll find them in massive groups in a dormant state, so you can just sneak around them. But if you wake one of them by touching it or making too much noise, then all of them wake up. It's another situation where 1 is almost no threat, but 10 is a death sentence, mainly because they can spit on you and block your vision. I don't know what these are called, this game doesn't really have a wiki, but these floating electric enemies are really just like a nut tap the game hits you with every once in a while. They have this one super fast charge attack that hits you with, but once they get in close they take like 2 hits and barely do any damage. They're kind of an annoyance because they can do a lot of bleed damage, which causes you to slowly lose health over time, requiring you to whip out your backpack and put on a bandage, sometimes right in the middle of a fight. The next enemy introduced is a one-off, which I think is a shame because it's pretty cool. It's a completely invisible enemy called a Shrieker. It's not like it does a ton of damage or anything, but it's pretty panic-inducing to just start getting attacked by something you can't see out of nowhere. The Shrieker also doesn't have much health, but it requires you to just swing blindly or shoot at nothing to kill it, so it's kind of fun. Then you get the big brutes, which are one of the enemies I said are almost never worth melee fighting. See, most attacks in this game will stagger enemies every couple of hits, so if you can keep the pressure on, you can avoid taking damage from most single enemies. These guys do not get stunned though, so fighting them in melee is almost a guarantee that you'll take damage. Just like the Shrieker, there's another invisible enemy in this game, although these ones are pretty easy to see because the air around them kind of shimmers. They're more like traps than anything because if you run into them or get too close to them, they'll explode, but all you have to do to kill them is hit them with any one attack. That means you can just throw shit at them, like bottles, rocks, or even throw your weapon and it'll kill them. The harpoon gun is also useful because you can shoot a harpoon, collect it, then reload and shoot another one. In theory, it's useful anyway, because the harpoon gun is heavy as fuck and you can just grab a pair of scissors and throw that at them over and over to clear them out, so whatever. One of the more engaging enemies are these psychic ones, because they do 2 things. One is catch bullets or anything else you throw at them and send them back at you, and 2 is that if you look at them in the eyes when they shriek, it does massive damage. How much damage? I don't know, because it's pretty easy to just look away when they start winding up for the attack. Where they really shine though is when one gets thrown in with a group of other enemies, like big brutes or a bunch of spiders. Enemies that would usually be light work with a couple bullets, but now you can't use those. So you either have to try to juke the other enemies to get to the psychic, or just stick to melee and try not to get jumped. Another fun enemy type are the dudes, basically just guys with weapons, but they have like 4 and they'll throw them at you if you try to run. These guys are kind of fun because you can really flex on them with how much better you are at the game than they are. It's even more funny when the dudes with guns start getting thrown at you. I remember when the first one walked out at me and I was like, holy fuck, they're allowed to have guns? And frantically pulled out one of my guns so I didn't get smoked. It sounds stupid, but it was a good moment. These X-shaped guys are straight out of Silent Hill, and much like the big brutes, they're not worth fighting in melee. They'll fuck you up too much to justify saving the ammo by not using a gun on them. They do look pretty creepy though, so I'll give them that. And I think that's all the normal enemies. So not a huge amount of variety, but I think they get the job done. I think it's rare to find a survival horror game that has good combat, so that alone should be a reason why you check out Total Chaos, even if the enemies aren't the most interesting thing. Now on to the dreaded horror sections, which are both some of the best and some of the worst parts of this game. So pretty frequently, your character just loses their shit and gets pulled into this alternate reality where fleshy tunnels can carry you between buildings, and strange faceless men watch you at every turn. The filter they put over the screen when you're mad is pretty creepy, I actually really love it, and some of the set pieces are cool, like being stuck in a giant wound while a needle fills it up with blood. Some of the later madness sections even add new enemies to the areas, like these guys connected to the ceiling by their head, and these weird rotten versions of brutes. And that right there is one of the coolest parts about madness. Whether you get rid of it by saving at a checkpoint is kind of up to you. You can just not do that, and actually not doing it is critical to getting the good ending, which we'll discuss. But yeah, the madness sections are all really good, no complaints. However, they're not the only horror sections of this survival and horror video game. The other half are sections where you're forced to run or hide from an unkillable being that will end you in a second. The first of these is actually kinda cool, if a little confusing at the start. Leading up to this room is writing on the wall that warns you not to take your eyes off something. That something turns out to be a 3-headed monster that moves anytime you're not looking at it. If it reaches you, it blows up. The kinda weird part about it is that this monster really isn't that scary looking. So I don't know why our boy starts panicking the second he sees one, but whatever. The first one is pretty cool and teaches you how to manage these things, which you need later on because the game throws 3 of them at once at you. These sections can definitely be frustrating, but they're more of a puzzle than anything. Just a puzzle with very strict timings in certain ways. Still fun though. The first actual horror section is when you get attacked in the basement of the police station by a giant 4-legged monster that kills you in 2 hits. Now my first playthrough, when I was over encumbered, I thought this was the worst thing ever because she can catch you in a millisecond and kill you in 2 hits. But on my second, I realized that again, that's because I was playing the game wrong. It's still not the greatest section in the world. Basically you need to sneak between like 3 rooms, like 3 times each, to gather up fuses and open certain doors, which make a loud noise that draws your girl, the 4-legged monster with a baby fuse to its chest, to your position. I still say, even with the context of a second playthrough, this was probably the worst chase section in the game. I think one big problem this game has is that they kind of triple dip with these sections way too much and end up kind of ruining what the whole point of survival horror is. The next one happens 2 chapters later, where you end up in this giant library and have to search it up and down for books that'll help you solve a puzzle. The library in itself looks pretty cool. I don't even know how to describe it. It's just a massive thing hanging from the ceiling that emerges from darkness to chase you. This game loves darkness, by the way, which we can really see in a minute. Anyway, immediately the next chapter has more chase scenes. This time the monster chasing you is also really cool. It's a giant tree that you first see stalking you in the distance before it finally starts chasing you. I shouldn't even need to say it, but you know that it was much harder to evade my first playthrough when I weighed 300 pounds. You end up having to juke this one too when you get trapped in an arena with it and have to break down a door with the harpoon and avoid getting trampled the entire time. The game then has another chase scene in the next section. Kinda. This one takes place in a pitch black labyrinth, and every minute or so you'll hear something. I don't know what, coming at you from the darkness. You have to extinguish your flame in time or die. It's actually kind of funny. When I first played this section, it was like 9 AM on a Saturday, so the sun was glaring on my screen like crazy and I literally could not see anything. Like I even tried cranking the gamma up and my monitor brightness up and I still couldn't see a thing. Which sucks because at a certain point you have to go underwater and use flares to guide your way, which was even harder to see with the sun on my screen. When I did my second playthrough, I played this part when it wasn't so fucking bright outside, and I realized that it actually isn't really that dark. I can't say before this I've ever had to think to myself, I can't play this game right now because it's too early, until Total Chaos. But obviously that has nothing to do with the game itself. Anyway, I like this section even if the monster doesn't really add anything to it. But it gets a little weird because after you clear the maze, you can go into another maze where the opposite is true. If you let your flares die, then the monster gets you, but that one's optional, so whatever. Far and away my favorite horror section was when you're thrown in this underground facility looking for a key, and this happens. I don't know why I have this reaction, but I just find these things so insanely gross when they're moving around, especially because you can only see their eyes in the dark. Like, it's so well done. They do get reused later, but the tension is always there because in the first section you have to keep your lighter on because they can't stand the light. Meanwhile, pipes are blasting steam at you and industrial fans blow it out. While in the second one you have to duck underwater occasionally, which is obviously going to put your light out. You then have one final one in the very last chapter where you avoid these weird ballerina things, which also look cool. But at this point, I was very much feeling like, okay buddy, like is this a survival horror game or is it a horror game? Or is it a survival game and a horror game in one? Honestly, that last one. But before we really get into the good shit, let's discuss the 2 bosses of the game. I don't know why I said it like that either. The first one is against your girl again. After the chase section, she floats around the arena attacking you and you get infinite SMG ammo to fight her. Whenever you do enough damage to her, one of the pillars in the room will be replaced by a massive fleshy human stuck together, so you have to kill that and then keep attacking her. It's honestly kind of lame, but not horrible. The final boss is much the same. You fight yourself, at first melee only, but then get given an infinite supply of revolver ammo as he gets these sky tentacles to attack you with. You shoot the glowing weak spots on the tentacles, attack your clone, repeat a couple times, and boom, you win. Again, it's not bad, but it's also not that good. So the story. Obviously massive spoilers ahead, but the story is not one a lot of people will like, for a lot of reasons. The most obvious one is that nothing that happens in this game is actually real, like not even close. It's a game about fighting your inner demons and depression. Is that lame? Kinda, which you might think makes me a hypocrite because the Evil Within story also takes place inside of some guy's head. Except in that game, that guy's head is like an alternate world where people's minds get stuck in, and just watch my video from like a year and a half ago, right? I actually can't strongly recommend that video. That was a long time ago. I don't know if it's any good or not. Anyway, let's go deeper into the story. So at the start, you know nothing. You're just some guy on a monster-infested island with only a strange voice on the radio to guide you. This guy's voice actor actually does an amazing job. I don't know why I like this performance so much, but it's almost like he's trying to be fake mysterious.
I've been alone in this place. Isolated and rotting away. It has been suffocating. Every moment you dwell here will lead you closer to inevitability. If you still had a chance to leave, would you take it?
Which at first I thought was just the voice actor being bad, but the more the game goes on, you realize that it's not the actor, it's the character. And once you get emotion out of him, it's a really great performance.
They said it wouldn't change anything. And now it's too late! I don't need them. I don't need anyone. Someone could still understand. But not them. Not family. Something else.
Anyway, he tells you where to go and what to do, all the while you learn about his backstory. What he wants you to do is meet him at the mine across the island. But damn near everything keeps going wrong and preventing you from getting to that mine. Over time, it becomes very clear that you and the Radio Man are the same person, Tyler. It starts out as people like the girlfriend, who Radio Man acknowledges is his ex, calling you a deadbeat for not taking care of their kid, and then eventually evolves into Radio Man just using I and you interchangeably. The story you learn of this man is pretty heartbreaking. He was a Coast Guard reserve member who got caught in a storm and washed up on this island, only to slowly fall in love with the place. He moved his girlfriend out there, made friends with the locals, and all in all it looked like everything was going well for him. But his girlfriend couldn't stand living on an isolated old island with like 20 people on it. Anytime she brought it up, the two got into a fight, eventually resulting in her leaving, neither of the two knowing that she was pregnant at the time. At some point, our boy was then diagnosed with cancer, forcing him to move back to the mainland to get treatment, leaving him with basically nothing. No friends because they're all back on the island, no girl because they got into too many fights, and no kid, although that one was mainly his fault. It seems like the more and more Tyler sunk into depression, the more he pushed everyone away. His old friend from the island, Ryan, wanted to keep in touch, but Tyler never answered his calls. It also seems like the ex-girlfriend wanted their kid to have a relationship with him, but he refused to even hold them. Tyler eventually beat his cancer, with the doctors treat as a celebration, although to Tyler, it's probably the worst outcome. So Tyler goes back to the island, where he relives all of his greatest failures before hanging himself in the old mine on the island. And that is the actual story of Total Chaos. Now do you see why I said that name sucks for this game? So the monsters you fight and the struggle you struggle is really just a man failing to cope with the mistakes he's made in life and ending it all. I'm sure you could dig into some of the monster designs and what they represent, but I'm not near smart enough to do that. So let's just move into the good ending, and why this pushed this game from like a B tier to an S for me. So to get the good ending, you have to do a couple of things. The main one is to ignore almost everything Radio Man tells you to do, as in the bad ending, you know that when you meet him in the mine, that's really just Tyler's dark side giving in. So if he tells you to kill something, you don't. If he tells you to go right, you go left, and by golly, if he tells you to ground yourself before continuing, don't fucking do it. To get the good ending, you have to do one or two things each chapter. For some, it's just collecting a certain item or not killing certain enemies, but for others, oh boy. The hardest chapter of them all is Chapter 5, where you have to beat the chapter while in the Madness world, which means you can't save and have to fight a shitload of new enemies on top of the existing ones. There's some other ones like not killing the boss that is your girlfriend, which makes sense, but really the main point of these is not taking the easy way, confronting the uncomfortable, going out of your way to make previous rights wrong, and ignoring that voice in your head that tells you to give up. Chapter 5 is the best example of this because you literally have to face down your own madness to get through it. But you know what your reward is? To get to skip the entire librarian section. He just doesn't appear. It's completely free. But here's where it really gets genius. You know how I said the carry weight system definitely had nothing to do with the story? Well, I lied, buddy. On the good ending path, you get a set of armor that massively increases your carry weight, which you won't get if you do the bad ending, which is almost like the normal ending in this game. This is meant to literally represent the weight coming off your shoulders in real time as you confront your failures, become a better person because of it. It's such good shit, and I'm usually such a simpleton when it comes to reading into the metaphorical in video games. But if you do follow the good ending path, you get to hear many tapes of Tyler talking to his therapist, and some of these are genius as well. Like, for example, when you're in the pitch black maze, Radio Man can't talk to you, seemingly because you're too far underground. But if you listen to a tape found in the maze, you learn that this is actually an exercise that Tyler's therapist had him do.
I want you to think of a place. It can be real, it can be fictional, but it has to be a place that you would like to be at any given time. So that when you're feeling overwhelmed or you feel chaotic, you go to this place. Give it a name. Some people will call it their happy place. I'm sure you've heard that before. But give it your own name. This place, in your mind, is only for you. Invasive thoughts are not allowed. Nobody's other voice is allowed. You are allowed to say no to those things.
Creating a safe place where no intrusive thoughts or dark voices can talk to you. What the fuck, man, it's so good, and you don't realize that until you start going down the good ending path and hear more of these therapy tapes. There's also this one thing you have to do in the bad ending, where you inadvertently burn Tyler's best friend from the island. You don't actually burn him, it's just symbolic, bro, just like everything else in this game. But if you avoid that by doing the good ending, you get to hear phone calls that confirm that Tyler reconnected with him.
I'm glad you reached out again and kept this connection alive. It means a lot. Port Oasis, it was beautiful. So many good memories. Moments I thought would last forever. It's hard to accept it's all gone now. Hey, listen, we're still here. We might be scattered, living different lives and walking different paths, but we haven't disappeared. You just have to find us again. And you can, Tyler. I know you can.
And of course, if you take it all the way to the end, Tyler doesn't kill himself. Hell yeah. So yeah, the story is just all inside of a guy's head, but what it represents is really good. Now earlier I said that this game's story might be a little controversial, and I think that's for two reasons. One is just because of the whole it was all in his head twist, which is always pretty lame. People, me included, don't like this twist because no matter how well it's done, it means the monsters you've busted your ass fighting weren't real. This island actually isn't infested by monsters, and there wasn't any stakes in the game beyond, in this case, your character's life. But that's also pretty common. Like, if you'll allow me to talk one more time about the fucking evil within, that's also the stakes in that game, at least in the first one. The second one ruins that because that game sucks, and I will argue with you about that. But despite the horrors you experience in that game, where you're trapped inside of the brain of a serial killer that's been turned into basically a massive simulation, the only real stake is you and your partners dying inside, which means you die in real life, and the serial killer possessing this kid's body, which will allow him to escape into the real world. But like the wider world has almost no stakes in this beyond having a serial killer on the loose again, the horrors you see inside of the simulation will never be able to escape, and while I love that game, I understand how that's disappointing. The other reason is that stories where the player character ends their life on screen have been pretty controversial in the past, mainly because I think people are uncomfortable with having to play through that in first person, but that's not a huge issue for me. Is it uncomfortable? Yes, but at least in this game you cannot do that if you get the good ending, although it's basically impossible to get that ending on your first playthrough unless you use a guide. Alright, so let's get back to the actual point of this video. Is this game good as a survival horror game? It's hard to say, but I lean towards no. Almost everything important about survival horror isn't really big in this game. I think the overabundance of supplies is the biggest example of that. But this game also is very much not action horror, which also give you too many supplies. It's kind of something new. It actually might be the first survival horror game, and I kind of love it. Thank you all so much for watching.